Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me today. My name is Gonzalo Sánchez. I am Policy Officer for Circular Economy and the Carbon Neutrality in the building sector. And it's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the European Environmental Law, as period made before in other events or in other sessions of this event. And as you know, the European Environmental Law is the largest network of environmental citizen organizations in Europe, bringing together more than 100 of civil society organizations. And our aim is to advocate for progressive policies to create a better environment in the European Union and beyond. And today I will focus my presentation on one of the questions raised for this workshop related to the promotion of circular economy in the building sector. Next slide, please. I'm not sure if... So, in my case, I've been working on several European policies, and I would like to bring you the policy framework needed to promote circularity in buildings. But first of all, I would like to remind you what we want to promote and we want to achieve when we promote circularity in the building sector. The aim is to decarbonize the built environment, including buildings and the construction sector. And as you can see in this graph, the decrease in CO2 emissions that has to take place in order not to exceed the 1.5 degrees of global warming is very high. And the CO2 emissions that we have to avoid exceeding this limit are called the carbon budget, and we have a limit on this. We don't have a lot of carbon budget to spend in the next years. And for this reason, the longer we delay the reduction of carbon emissions, the more difficult it could be in the future to reduce emissions in less time and with less carbon budget. And and circularity is one of the key instruments and strategies to achieve this goal in the building sector. Next slide, please. So let's think about the construction sector and buildings now. I would like to start discussing a little bit the framework on emissions, CO2 emissions. Emissions generated in a building have two main origins. There are the emissions related to the operational state and emissions generated during the manufacturing and construction processes. Generally speaking, the emissions related to the operational phase that you can see in the infographic in color blue are related to the energy efficiency, whereas the other emissions, which are the carbon emissions associated with materials and construction processes throughout the whole life cycle of the building, are not very well addressed in policies. These emissions are called embodied emissions, and as you can see in orange in the infographic, there are also a big amount of them in the whole life cycle of buildings. In this context, circularity is one of the main tools to reduce these embodied emissions beyond the operational phase and the energy efficiency of the buildings. Just like a general figures around the 10-20%.
Sorry, the translation is not working.
It's not working?
It's working?
It's working?
Oh.
Yeah? Everything is okay?
On Zoom.
On Zoom?
Not about Zoom, it's about the
Konuşmacının. It's about speakers.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
please.
It's okay? Shall I continue or?
Mr. Gonzalo, if you have the microphone, it will be much easier for the translators.
If I what? Sorry?
But microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's continue then. Let's continue. I think it will be. Yes.
It's okay.
I think so.
Properly?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. Well, I was saying that around 10 and 20% of the European building CO2 footprints comes from embodied emissions. And this is a general figures of these CO2 emissions related by the life cycle of buildings. Next slide, please. Well, I would like to continue with a little bit of the background on this. In Europe, the use of buildings accounts for around 40% of energy consumption and 36% of CO2 emissions. And this is just the operational impact of buildings. It is estimated that embodied carbon today contributes typically depending on factors such as the building type, construction technique, materials, grid intensity, and in some European countries with low carbon energy, the embodied emissions share can already be as high as 50%, which is a lot. 50% of the total CO2 emissions generated in a building are related to embodied emissions in the high-level energy efficiency countries. And this percentage will increase in the following years because the improvement of the energy efficiency. And this is one of the key points in which circularity has a real impact to reduce the emissions related for materials. And beyond the CO2 emissions, buildings also account for around 50% of all extracted materials, 33% of water consumption, and 35% of waste generated. And circularity can reduce effectively the embodied emissions generated by the construction sector, reduce the generation of waste, and the need to extract virgin materials and deplete natural resources. And this is the aim of the circularity in terms of environmental impacts. Next slide, please. Well, I would like to remind us that circularity impacts the whole life cycle of buildings. And one of our aims is to create new links between some stages, such as the following ones, the dismantling and manufacturing stages, and consequently creating recycling processes, or the dismantling and construction stages, which will result in the creation of a reusing process. So in that sense, circularity aims to reduce using virgin raw materials and reduce generating construction waste. Therefore, the more links each step has with no external inputs, the more decarbonized the process is. Now I will present the three main European policies that are related to buildings, in which this holistic and cross-cutting vision of circularity can be promoted. And the policies are the Construction Plan Regulation, which regulates the construction and characteristics of building materials, the Energy Performance of Building Directive, which establishes the minimum requirements at the building level, and the Waste Framework Directive, which sets out the requirements and targets for waste management. And the combination of the three different policies is the only way to ensure the circularity plays a major role in the construction sector. So let's start with the Construction Plan Regulation. Next slide, please. The Construction Plan Regulation provides a framework for placing construction products on the market. And it does not set minimum requirements or functionality requirements so far, so the objective is to ensure the reduction of the environmental impact embodied in buildings, driven by requirements on the embodied environmental impacts of materials and products, including through enhanced circularity. This is the aim of the CBR for us. Therefore, the question that we can ask is how can we do it in this kind of legislation? So let's take a look at the current situation in the following slides. Please, next slide. These are the overall policies and actions in this regulation. I split them into positive, promising, and untapped potentials in this regulation. Firstly, the CPR opened the door to regulating products from an environmental performance. The integration of product requirements in some articles is a good first step to reducing the environmental impact of products that should entail the development of minimum requirements at least on inherent product requirements such as minimizing whole life cycle greenhouse emissions, maximizing recycled content, the capability of different materials or substances to be separated and recovered during dismantling and recycling procedures. These kind of things will be made through this construction product regulation. Secondly, the European Commission is empowered to define these requirements per product group, including cement, steel, all these kind of materials. And this could be made through legal acts, in the case in Europe, through delegated acts, and co-decision processes. This will make regulating construction products more transparent and participatory. Thirdly, the declaration of performance of products, which is the main tool used to report the environmental impact of products, will cover both conformity with requirements and compliance with the standards. Fourthly, the CBR covers the integration of used, reused, and used materials in the market, which is a good step. And last but not least, the Commission has included a new chapter that covers member state incentives, including green public procurement, and it may be a step towards a widespread and potentially mandatory use of secondary materials in all public contracts. Next slide, please. The CBR also has some promising points. Firstly, if the European Commission develops minimum requirements per product category, it could restrict access to market and phase out the worst performing products from the market. And this is one of the key points. The worst performing products should comply with the minimum requirements that we need in the construction product in new and renovation buildings. Secondly, the CBR opened the door to creating a framework for reused construction products that will be used differently from the intended use assigned by the initial manufacturers. Moreover, it includes using them in another way than by reducing performance or intended usage. So in that sense, the CBR promotes the use of reused materials. And thirdly, the CBR obliges manufacturers to design products in such a way that reuse, remanufacturing, and recycling are facilitated, mainly by facilitating the separation of components and materials and at the later stage of recycling and avoiding mixed, blended, or intricate materials. This could be an important step towards circular materials if the implementation processes and the requirements for the characteristics are properly defined. Next slide, please. But we have also some untapped potential, something that could be necessary to include and is not very well developed yet. Firstly, if the CBR does not set any timeline or a work plan for the development of these minimum requirements for a product, the impact in the market are not ensured. A work plan deadline to develop these requirements through legal acts should be also included in the revision, considering the large variety of construction products covered by the CBR. And this is key in this process to avoid that materials are not well prepared and are well established the requirements for them, starting with the most polluter materials, such as cement, concrete, steel, or glass. Secondly, the rules for market access for reused materials are different from building materials, and mainly the product owners decide on applying the requirements to the used materials, which maybe it could be something that we can, let's say, improve in order to create a better framework for the use of these materials. And finally, the CBR still does not require a digital product passport as per all other products under the CBA. It's another European policy that I think Piers talked about that yesterday. Still, there is an open door for implementing it through legal acts, the use of this digital product passport. But again, we want to see this timeline and deadline in this implementation. Next slide, please. So now we started with the construction product regulation at the level of the manufacturing of the product, and now we move on to the building level with energy performance of the directives, the EPBD. Next slide, please. So the first question: what is the aim of the EPBD? The EPBD sets building level requirements for the European Union and guides member states in implementation of relevant measures, and will not look at the decarbonization based on the current cost. The objective is improve the energy efficiency of the worst performing buildings and the building stock to the highest level of performance through low carbon heat renovations. However, the current EPBD proposal just addresses operational CO2 emissions, the energy efficiency. Therefore, embodied emissions should be integrated, including circularity as the main instrument for this decarbonization process. Next slide, please. Based on this, let's say, first hypothesis, there are main points to be considered in the CPR. We want to establish an ambitious whole life carbon roadmap for the decarbonization of buildings, including embodied emissions and operational emissions, setting targets, benchmark, and limits for the reduction of these embodied and operational emissions, because this is the way in which low carbon materials have a demand for the use. And this is a key point in this directive. We will also include instruments and strategies that contribute to the reduction of whole life carbon emissions, such as circularity and sufficiency, and the use of low carbon and natural-based materials. And finally, promoting reversibility and adaptability of buildings is one of the key points for that. Next slide, please. And I would like to go into more detail and analyze one of the potential requirements that might be included in this regulation, which could be the inclusion of requirements to set specific national targets for 2030 of at least 50% for the use of secondary materials in buildings by 2025 to generate the market for secondary materials. And this is what I meant before with generation of this market for secondary materials. We need that this kind of directives and laws create the framework and the market for these secondary and low carbon materials. And why do we have this percentage, this 15%, sorry? Because we have the evidence for it. In this slide, you can find the data on which this percentage is based. And I would like to highlight that based on Eurostat, Europe has sufficient available secondary raw materials to meet an average of 50% recycled content level today. Although these percentages are not exclusively for building materials, it makes sense that we can ask in a few years that at least all buildings contain the current market values for secondary materials. And this is something that could be translated to the Turkish context as well. Moreover, the Circular Economy Action Plan aims to double the circular materials use rate by 2030. So in that sense, we expect that this percentage will increase the use of these secondary materials. Next slide, please. Now we will move to the building level with the framework, with the waste management, with the waste framework directive. Firstly, we started with the construction product regulations. After that, the level of buildings. Now with the waste management. The Waste Framework Directive defines the conditions and the process for waste management, including requirements and targets for the management and recovery of construction materials. This is the, let's say, the framework for this directive. Next slide, please. First, let's take a look at some points related to the background on this issue in the European context. When it comes to the background on this, firstly, the majority of construction and demolition waste components could be reprocessed. This is something important to take into account. Secondly, the Technology for separation and recovery is well established in Europe. And last but not least, despite this, the level of recycling and material recovery of construction and demolition waste varies widely across the European Union. Next slide, please. So, waste prevention is the priority for circularity. And for this purpose, we have some key points that we have to include in these discussions. In the first place, it is important to ensure appropriate waste management and prevent landfilling or incineration of valuable resources. In the second place, the more harmonized the standards are promoted for reusing and recycling materials, the closer the loop in the construction is, and thus more sustainable, as mentioned in the first slide on the whole carbon of buildings. And in the third place, an accurate design is essential to limit the amount of waste, especially hazardous waste, and facilitate material recycling. Next slide, please. And now I wanted to mention the most important policies on circularity. First of all, we can see the Circular Economy Action Plan with the Sustainable Product Policy Framework and the European Strategy for a Sustainable Built Environment, and the Less Waste, More Value measures. There are several policies that support the Waste Framework Directive in order to promote this better management of construction waste. Next slide, please. So now let's focus on the Waste Framework Directive, where construction and demolition waste is the priority for this directive in terms of management. And this directive set the objectives mentioned on construction and waste in these 3 bullet points. By 2020, preparing for reuse, recycling, and other materials recovery of non-hazardous construction and demolition waste shall be increased to a minimum of 70% by weight. Promote selective demolition to enable removals and safe handling of hazardous substances, and facilitate reuse and high-quality recycling by selective removal of materials. And thirdly, reduce waste generation. These are the 3 main objectives that the Waste Framework discuss with construction waste and generation. Next slide, please. And furthermore, we have other references, as mentioned before, such as the Construction and Demolition Waste Management Protocol, or guidelines for the waste audited for demolition and renovation works of buildings. This is a good report and policies, let's say, it's not exactly policies, it's more like protocols and support for these policies that could be also used in the target's context. Next slide, please. But there are also some untapped potentials on this directive, such as preparing for reuse, recycling on minimum 90% by weight, mandating pre- and demolition audits, introducing targets for the separation, collection, and key materials seen on a volume basis. Well, there is an amount of list of potential measures that we think that it could be included in the construction product framework. Next slide, please. You can read it careful after the presentation. I don't want to read everything because it's a long list, but maybe, for example, just to mention a couple of them in this slide, like the mandatory product and materials take-back schemes for unused construction materials, or establishing national and regional extended producers responsibility schemes in the construction sector. Next slide, please. So, trying to sum up the general approach of each file, the main point in its policy that could support a better decarbonization design and a high circularity in buildings are presented in this slide. When it comes to the CPR, just to remind us the main point, establishing requirements for information such as bill of materials and instruction for disassembly to support circularity use of products is one of the key points, and establishing minimum requirements for circularity based on performance indicators including durability, reparability, usability, and recyclability are the other key points. When it comes to the PPD, we consider the PPD should address both operational energy use and embodied impacts, and tackle body emissions in both buildings and construction materials, ensuring a whole life cycle approach, and promoting circularity handling of substitute materials for renovations through pre-demolition audits, and creating markets for materials revalorization should be one of the key points to be included in this directive. And regarding the waste directive, in the first place, establishing harmonized standards of circularity and mandatory pre-demolition audits is something that it should be also included in the framework of this kind of policies, and the preparation for reuse, recycle, or the material recovery should be the highest as possible. All in all, within the combination of these policies will promote more quality in dismantling processes, ensuring a better deconstruction design and better use of the reused and recycled materials. Next slide, please. And yeah, but well, yes, if I had to choose one final comment, an idea for you today, it is the fact that circularity is a cross-cutting issue in the construction sector and should have a clear impact on each policy in their different part of the life cycle of buildings. And as mentioned, the BBD is clear to create the demand of the market for low carbon products, the CBR to create the norms and the harmonized info of product placed on the market, and the Waste Framework Directive to create the legal drivers on economic incentives to reuse and recycle construction materials. These are the three main points, and after that you can go in depth in all of them with the other slide in each the legislation. And without this coordination and coherence policy action, no real impact can be ensured in the construction sector. If a clear policy framework and objective are not established and a clear signal is not sent to the market that this is the way in which we have to work, it will be almost impossible for circularity to develop further than it currently is. So in that sense, it's necessary to walk the talk and make our building stock clean and decarbonized. So thank you. I will leave here and looking forward for further discussion and questions on this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. Now I open the floor for questions or comments. Do we have comments on Zoom? If not, then let's move on. Yes, Piotr. Yes.
Hi, Gonzalo. So, thank you very much. One just thing that is relevant for us here in Turkey, I think, well, there are many, but one that I would emphasize more is the construction product regulation, which would require minimum requirements for construction products put on the market in the EU, and that is also cement. And if I am not mistaken, Turkey is one of the big exporters of cement to Europe. And would you say that it may have implications for Turkish producers? And if yes, how, or what kind of, or what they should think of and envisage?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, in that sense, we have to be conscious that if the European Union developed this minimal requirement for cement and concrete, this is something that has a clear impact in all countries that import or export construction materials in Europe. Because if we want to play at the same level, all products that are used in Europe should follow the same rules. So in that sense, of course, the company that has more investment in this kind of low carbon concrete solutions and that include in their process this environmental impact, will have more opportunities to continue selling these products in Europe. And this is also one of the key points of discussion that we have at the European Union.
Okay. If there are no further questions, Gonzalo, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's a pity that you're not with us here in sunny Antalya. but I believe there will be occasions when we will listen to your presentations also in a physical environment. I wish you a nice rest of the day in Brussels. And thank you once again.
Thank you very much.